The socio-rhetorical commentary on 2 Corinthians says this, and I quote, "The contrast between darkness and light in verse number 6 is appropriate in view of the preceding discussion about glory. Here, light stands for knowledge of God, which in this case is gained from gazing on the glorious face of Christ. To look at him is to know what God is like. Having such knowledge is a great treasure, even though it is kept in earthenware vessels." There's that word, vessel. This may be, I'm still quoting, this may be a reference to the cheap pottery lamps made in Corinth and used for walking around at night. Precisely because of their thinness, these vessels let out more light. This frail form also makes it clear that the light comes from another source. So Paul adds that in his case, his frailty ought to make obvious that the power is coming from God and not from himself. Yes. End of quote. Church of God, I don't know about you, but I'm a thin, frail vessel. Yes. I'm a clay jar. I'm a physical object that gets broken down. A physical object that gets cracks in it. I'm a clay jar that can be tossed and thrown away. I'm a physical body that gets weary and tired, but aren't you glad that the Waymaker was gracious enough to allow the Spirit of God to take up residence in our clay jars? Aren't you glad that the Waymaker has allowed our thin vessels, frail thin vessels, to shed some light out of our cracks? Aren't you glad that the ultimate potter has the ability to reshape us? This is the treasure. This is that extraordinary power that we possess. Yes, maybe, because I was hoping for a bigger reaction than that, but maybe you didn't catch it. So I'll bring it a little close to home. Work with it now. So let me take you back to slavery times, where this extraordinary power was put on display in a testimony from a former slave. The former slave said, and I quote, "I sat down by the roadside and wept, prayed, and wished myself back where I first started. I thought it was all over with me forever. I thought, while I would turn back and give myself up to be captured. Then I thought that would not do. Then a voice spoke to me. Not to make a fool of myself. You have to go far from home. Keep on towards freedom. And if you are taken, let it be heading towards freedom." Then I took fresh courage and pressed my way onward towards the north with anxious heart. End of quote. Beloved, that is the Spirit of the Lord in a nutshell. This northern road was rough for this former slave, but he or she had the spirit of the "I'll never leave you or forsake you, Lord," dwelling with them. Lord was rolling with them. And I believe it was King Solomon who said, "The Lord will dwell with us during the rough and dark times of our lives." And what a segue into what Paul says next. Paul juxtaposes, and that's just a big old word for placing side by side something for comparison. But Paul juxtaposes two things in these verses. The two things he compares is death and life. Just like in Paul's day, so it is in ours. We are living in an age where rough times occur. People are afflicted, perplexed, persecuted, and struck down. This is the death side of the list. As I said earlier, people that experience these situations often give up hope for abundant life and commit suicide. Paul is letting the people of our time know that followers of Jesus experience the same things that people who don't mold their life after Jesus experienced. But instead of giving up all hope for an abundant life, these followers of Jesus continue to hold out hope because they have, you guessed it, that extraordinary power living inside of them that sustains them through these difficulties. The disciples and followers and learners of Jesus, that's us, I might add, need to let the people of our time know that they need Jesus, the liberator, and the sustaining power of the Holy Spirit. Somebody praise God. Yes. I'm almost there. On the other side of Paul's list, he gives some positive, uplifting words. This is the life side of the list. It's interesting to note that Paul doesn't speak life-giving words first. I believe it's because it was on purpose, because of what happened to Jesus at Calvary. And we all know that God can bring life out of dead situations. Yes. See, but Paul here shows his gangsterness. See, you understand, you do understand that Paul was a real gangster.
Oh, that's right.
He was getting coats and cloaks thrown at his feet, persecuting the followers of the way.
Yeah.
Open the book of Acts and you will see his name was Saul.
Yeah.
But Paul showed his gangsterness. He was a real gangster, and real gangsters fight through the pressures and pains of life.
That's right.
These spiritual gangsters don't give up when the road gets rough. And we know that Brother Paul went through some rough times while spreading the gospel of Jesus the Liberator. He fought internal demons as well as external demons.
Right.
You see, Paul wasn't a superficial Christian. That is, his Christianity wasn't on surface level. His Christianity went deeper. You see, Paul didn't preach a name it or claim it gospel. He didn't preach a gospel without suffering. He didn't preach a gospel where he said he wouldn't or didn't get sick.
Right.
No, Paul said that all of this happened to me, but I'm still living.
Yeah.
But unlike some who have given up hope or thrown in the towel or even committed suicide, I almost did.
Yes.
But I didn't. I was afflicted in every way, but not crushed. That's life. I was perplexed, but not driven to despair. Life. I was persecuted, but not forsaken. I was struck down, but I wasn't destroyed. I always carried in my body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may be seen in my body. Yeah, it was somewhere said about Jesus that in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears. You see, Jesus struggled. I know you're aware of that too. The one who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. Somebody say resurrection life. He was obedient to suffering. He suffered and he was obedient. I know that's a cuss word, beloved. Suffering.